Good evening and welcome to the Berks Recovery Out Loud speaker series. My name is Yvonne. I'm a person in long-term recovery. And I should say welcome back for some of you because you've been coming and tuning in with us on Tuesday and Thursday evenings to hear about the different pathways to recovery. And as I mentioned last week, according to SAMHSA, which is a Substance Abuse Administration, we talk about over 23 million Americans being in long-term recovery from substance use disorder. And so we know that there are many pathways which individuals engage in to find wellness, well-briety, sobriety, and happiness in their lives. And tonight, I'm happy and excited to bring to you a friend of mine, Dan. Dan's going to introduce himself in the next couple minutes. And so we invite you as you join us live to listen to Dan talk about a little bit about his story and more importantly, what his life is like today. Because one of the things we want to do during National Recovery Month is enjoy the Beatitudes of recovery, right? And so hear what he has to say. Please feel free to toggle in the welcome chat box on Facebook Live, any questions that you have for Dan. And then towards the end of the hour, we'll ask Dan those questions and he can respond to them appropriately. So without further ado, I'm going to turn off my mic and I'm going to introduce you to Dan.
Okay, thanks, Yvonne. And yeah, my name's Dan and I'm an addict. I came to start working with the Berks Rise Center in 2019. I had gotten asked to come to a few meetings and bring a different perspective of my journey in recovery as an insight to what the center has evolved into. And it was really trending in a positive direction. It's a shame that coronavirus has sort of put a speed bump in everything, but as I'm sure as everything will, it will come back and hopefully be back even stronger. But I'll share my journey and my pathway in recovery and what my life's like now. So I'm from Berks County originally. I grew up in Shillington. I have a very close with my family. Had a very good childhood, didn't have like really any traumatic events that happened to me through childhood, and went to Catholic school. From there, I went to public high school. And in high school is when I started experimenting with drugs and alcohol and cigarettes. And, it all stayed fairly manageable, I guess, if you want to call it. I mean, probably from the first time that I got high to when my sober date, which is January 25th, 2010, there wasn't a day where I didn't get inebriated off something. But, in high school, I just sort of plugged it along. Was not a good student. I barely graduated. After high school, I tried going to a college for a little bit, and college just wasn't for me. The freedom, I couldn't manage myself. I never showed up to a class. And around the Christmas break of that year, I had kind of a decision of where I was going to go in life. And I answered some ads in the paper, and I answered an ad for what I thought was a warehouse position in West Lawn, Pennsylvania. Went there. I'm 18 at this time. The guy's interviewing me, telling me something about a management training program. I don't really know what he's saying, but he tells me to show up the next day with a shirt and tie and spend the whole day with the person. So I show up and I get in the car with these guys and we drive up to Kutztown, Pennsylvania. And they just start walking into businesses selling things, and it was something I had never seen before. Growing up in the suburbs, I wasn't really exposed to business to business solicitations, but I was captivated by it. And I was never a natural student or a natural athlete, but when it came selling things business to business, I was a natural at it, and it's something I loved. And I bring up this part of my story because it kind of transitions into really, my addiction taking over my life. But I was I worked for this company from when I was 18 till I was 21. And most of the people that I worked and ended up living with were a good amount older than me. They were 24 and above. And especially before I turned 21, they would go out to bars Fridays and Saturday nights, and they try to sneak me in, and sometimes they would, and sometimes they wouldn't. And through these weekend interactions, I came to learn that a number of them were using cocaine. And at first, I was very resistant to it. I remembered all the things, that you learn in grade school health classes, and that's a real drug, so to speak, and that's not for me. But a big part of recovery, especially early in recovery, is people's places and things, and it's such an influencer. And people's places and things eventually normalized it for me, and I tried it. And another big part of my recovery is the Alcoholics Anonymous textbook, specifically the first 164. I find a lot of explanations in it of why I am the way that I am, and some of the things that I can do to overcome my character defects. But specifically, one chapter in it is Bill's story, and Bill talks about in his story, this "I have arrived" moment. And the first time I did cocaine, I had arrived, and I had realized that this is what has been missing, and I just want to feel this way all the time. So I was, able to keep it on a weekend thing for maybe a couple months, a year or something. And I was only going to do it on Saturdays, and then only on Fridays and Saturdays, and then only on Thursdays and Fridays and Saturdays. And it's the same old, and there's nothing in moderation for me. I mean, this is even still to this day, I can get carried away with seemingly, not things that you don't typically get addicted to. I can get myself addicted to it because it's, if I like doing something, I just want to do it all the time. And while I was working full time and I was, making a good living for myself, I mean, when you have a raging cocaine addiction, your money only goes so far. And, through this, I had to start stealing money and getting involved in things I shouldn't have gotten involved with. And I got confronted one day, and the company that I worked for terminated me. And I don't like to say that I was lucky in my story. I like to use a terminology called pursued by grace. And it was a very pursued by grace moment that I wasn't arrested for what I did. But basically, it was 4 years of my life, ended on a whim on a conference call, and showed back up to my parents and said that I needed a place to live, and that I was gonna, get a new job, and everything was gonna be normal. And my mom has since worked a recovery program herself, specifically Al-Anon, because she was very codependent on me, and I could manipulate her very easily. And that's what I did. So I'm living back with my parents, and I somehow get a job with Citizens Bank, and I have this, raging cocaine problem, full scale drug addict. How I even passed the drug test to get a job at Citizens Bank, I don't know. But through this time, I was not a good employee. I was not reliable. I, either showed up late to work, I left early, I slept while I was at work. And my time with Citizens Bank, was over pretty quicker than than it started, so to speak. So I'm fired from two jobs in, well under a year, maybe under 6 months. My mom had noticed that things had started missing around the house, and I was constantly asking for money even when I was working, and she became concerned. So I was able to manipulate her and keep it at bay, and just kind of explain it to, like, hey, this is my age. I'm allowed to party. I didn't go to college, so I'm getting my partying years out. And at this time, I'm obviously very close with my drug dealer, and he would see that, after I would do cocaine, I would have this, horrible come down, and, I would drink all this alcohol and have a panic attack. And, he would tell me, I got one bag of something that you sniff that, and it's like drinking 100 beers and you go right to sleep. And, I resisted at first, but people's places and things, That bag was heroin. It was around one night. I did it as prescribed, so to speak, and went right to sleep. I woke up the next morning. I didn't feel like I needed to sell all the TVs in my house. And I talked to this girl that I was seeing and told her what I did. And she said, you know, would you do it again? And I said, you know, I probably would. And that's the rest of 2008. You know, I become a heroin addict and all the debauchery involved with that. At the end of that summer, she goes to Penn State, Maine. She takes my heart with it. My mom had realized that something's severely wrong. You know, it's a story that we joke about now and look back on, but the lawnmower, you know, went missing like 3 times that summer. And she confronted me. I went to this place called Task in Reading, and I lied about my use, and you know, I got referred to an IOP. And I told my mom, I said, you know, I know what I need to do. I need to relocate. So I had a friend that lived in North Carolina, and I gave him a call and asked if I could come live with him. And you know, I went down there for like 2 weeks. It wasn't for me. This girl called me. I love you. I miss you. I need you. So I get back on Interstate 81. I drive there, and she just couldn't find drugs up in State College. So she needed somebody to act as that courier between Reading and State College, which I did. And Halloween 2008, it's a big celebrated event up at State College. I told my mom that, you know, I took my life so seriously that I'm not going to stay up there and party. So I wake up at 11 a.m. I take 2 Klonopin. I get in my car. And the next thing I know, I'm in the ICU of Hershey Medical Center with a nurse telling me that I need to either pee in a cup or I'll get a catheter. And I had made it all the way down to Juniata County, Pennsylvania, which is about 40 miles or east of State College. I was driving so fast that I hit an innocent man just trying to get out of my way. He was basically on the shoulder when I hit him. We were both ejected from our vehicles. I was not as injured as he was, but this is a very big pursued by grace moment in my life and my story and my recovery. You know, he wrote to me in his victim impact statement that he was conscious for the helicopter ride. So I think about how scary that probably was for him, but all he could do was pray for me. And you know, a big part of my sobriety is a relationship with God, is a spiritual relationship. You know, that's just what's worked for me. I'm not preaching and saying you need to do this in order to stay sober, but that's, you know, I've always bought into the 12 steps explanation that, you know, the alcoholic is the spiritual malady, and we have a God-sized hole that we try to fill with everything, but the only thing that's really going to fill it is a relationship with God. And that's how we, you know, obtain sobriety. And you know, I've just always felt a lot of comfort into that, and knowing that, you know, God was with me on that Halloween day and all the subsequent events that happened afterwards. But back to the hospital. So in the hospital, I had a chest tube in because I collapsed my lung. And when they take that out of you, they inject you with an opiate. And at that time, I had just been sniffing heroin. So they injected me with Dilaudid, and I had another I have arrived moment. And the pragmatic person may think to themselves, you know, you're in a hospital, you've totaled your car, you have no job, you know, you have no real prospects in life, things aren't going well. So it's time to, you know, straighten up and ship out. But all I could think about was how quick I could get out of this hospital and start injecting myself with drugs. And that's exactly what I did. And that's the rest of 2008. You know, I'm an IV heroin user. I missed the holidays with my family that year because I'm too busy nodding out at other people's tables, and all the darkness that's associated with that drug and using it that way. And in February of 2009, I had an event that I'd used drugs at someone's house, and they caught me in the act, and they didn't realize, you know, I had this quote unquote problem, and called my mom, and my mom had woke me up the next morning with a packed bag and told me I needed to go to the emergency room at her work. She worked at Penn State St. Joe's. Well, it was just St. Joe's at the time. And I needed to go to rehab. So that's what I did. And my first treatment center was Roxbury Treatment Center. It's in Shippensburg, Pennsylvania. And Roxbury at that time didn't believe in a medical detox. So they gave you blood pressure medicine called Clonidine, a Bible, and as many showers a day as you wanted. And that's how you kicked in there. So it was a tough 6 days, but I came out of the fog, and I think back on my time there very dearly. I met a lot of great people. I met a speaker that still to this day, I think about, his story and things that he said throughout his story. And but I was only there for 15 days. So it really was just enough time for the fog to get lifted and not really cement to anything. And yeah, I could recite a few things, go to meetings, get a sponsor, do a 90 and 90. And I went to meetings for a little bit, but it was people's places and things for me. I was not going to give up my friends and my other way of life. And I thought I could just go back to it, remove drugs, and everything would be fine. And that wasn't the case, because I was, around people that were still using. I don't know that they were addicts, but they were still using drugs and alcohol in front of me. And I eventually picked it up. And I said at that point, I don't, I know enough about recovery that I want it, but I don't necessarily know how to get it. So I've always been a big proponent of doing things the way I want to do them. And I went to the methadone clinic and they accepted me. And that was my first stint at medically assisted treatment. I was very short-lived at the methadone clinic. They kicked me right out because I kept failing drug tests, and I kept, I would go there to not be sick in the morning and then get high in the afternoon, and that's not how the methadone clinic works. So I got kicked out of there, and this is in the spring of 2009. One night I come home very suspiciously early for me. It was like 6:30 at night, and I go right to bed. And my mom had went through her car and found my syringe and all the paraphernalia. And she woke me up. She confronted me, and I left that night. The next morning, I stayed at a buddy's house that night, and the next morning, he was a landscaper. He woke me up at the crack of dawn, and he gave me some speech that I can't die in his basement, and it inspired me enough to knock on my mom's door and tell her that I need to go back to treatment. And another pursued by grace moment here, in the ER that day, where they had me just sort of waiting until they could find a treatment center, was Dr. Pandit. And Dr. Pandit lived next to Doug Tiemann, who's the CEO of Caron. And my mom is a nurse. My dad has worked in construction safety his whole life. They made sure I've never wanted for everything, but they didn't necessarily have Caron money. And Caron was not in network with, I don't know, any insurance carriers at that point, certainly not the insurance company I had. And they had something called the Burke Scholarship, which is a very significantly discounted rate to attend Caron for Berks County residents. And I was able to attend Caron, and it was a fantastic experience. I mean, it is, everything that a world-renowned treatment center is. I was there for 120 days almost. When I went to extended care, they give you a lot more freedom back. You have access to a phone, like on an on-demand basis, and you get passes. And there was just part of me that still, I wasn't entirely convinced that I needed to separate drugs. I realized I couldn't use drugs. Okay. I was resigned to that. I'm not going to use drugs, but I had thought to myself, I was 22 at this point. There's no way I'm not going to stop drinking. I mean, I didn't believe that the two really, were together. And I didn't share that with everybody. And, you're sick as your secrets and all the other kind of recovery jargon out there. But I went on a pass where you're allowed to go home. I was 72 hours and I got drunk on it. And I came back to Caron, and I didn't tell anybody, but my behavior was indicative of somebody that's, really on the precipice of another run in them. And I became so disruptive and so combative with staff that I actually got kicked out of Cairn maybe 2 weeks before I was actually supposed to be discharged. And from there, I went to EDI. And EDI is, for those that you don't know, it's in Leesport. And they are a recovery housing center that takes people from treatment centers and the county jail and other different mediums. And I went up to EDI on that same rah, Dan knows what's best. I'm only going to do what I want to do and what I think I need to do. And EDI kicked my ass right out. And from there, I had this woman that kept calling me. Her name was Elizabeth Woolridge. She works at Cairn. She was like my recovery coaching specialist, I think they called her. And she would just call and see how I was doing, if I was going to meetings and whatnot. And for whatever reason, I mean, I like to say it's a pursued by grace moment. I would just be honest with her, tell her what I was thinking, what was going on. And she, through this transitional time, she put me in touch with a gentleman named Brian Holstead, who owns Transitions and East Coast Recovery in Wyomissing. And I started going to Brian's groups. And I also started going back to people's places and things. This double life I was leaving these last couple months. It was a horrible time. You know, they say the saddest thing in the world is a head full of AA and a belly full of booze, and you can, you know, take that for what it is. And that's exactly what I was doing. I mean, I was getting high and I was going to meetings. I was getting high and I was going to small group. And you know, I'd fall asleep in these groups, and well, I'm not out really. And you know, I would wake up and everybody be staring at me, and I would leave in the middle of the group. And you know, I asked Brian years later why I was allowed to do that. Why? And you know, he told me, he goes, you know, you were the disease. So it was a really powerful tool to use in a controlled environment to show people what the disease was. And this was January 23rd of 2010. I went in the city to buy drugs. I got stopped by the police before I bought them, and they searched my car. They didn't find anything, but they found a 90-day coin. And the cop, I'll always remember this, he had me sitting on the curb, and he goes, you know, I'll catch you down here one day. And if at any point this was true, you're living a lie. And I went, I'm sure I used drugs that day. I woke up the next morning. I, you know, used whatever drugs a drug addict can save over the next day, which is typically not that much. My mom asked me if there was anything she could help me with. And another pursued by grace moment, I just was honest with her, and I told her I needed to go back to treatment. And I remember sitting in my first treatment center, and there were people in there that had been there 6 times, 7 times. And I was thinking, I'm never coming back to rehab. I mean, this sucks. I can't watch TV. I can't do this. You know, you don't necessarily have all your freedom. I was so sure of it that I was never going to come back to rehab. And, you know, here I am less than a year later, I'm going into my 3rd treatment center. And the only treatment center that was taking patients that night was the Reading Detox. So it was definitely a stark contrast from the Cairn Foundation. It was the old Reading Detox building. So there was like 5 patients to a room, and it was a hospital bed. And all my life, I grew up Catholic. I always foxhole prayed, you know, prayed when I need something. And, you know, Reading Detox is really where I just started having an open and honest conversation with God every day. And that's continued 10 years later. Every day I wake up and I have an out loud conversation with God. And that's where it started, was in the Reading Detox. And then from Reading Detox, I went to Brian's Sober Living. It wasn't really a facility, it was just a house then, because it was in Wormelsdorf. It was before he bought the place he has in Moton now. And Brian had recommended that I go see a doctor named Dr. Santora, and specifically to, you know, learn about Suboxone. And during my time out running around using drugs, I had known about Suboxone. I had even used it a few times to prevent myself from getting sick. So I went into this, and I had also tried to abuse Suboxone, but I was never successful. So I went into this meeting with Dr. Santora knowing that I didn't have anything to gain by trying to play around the system, and got involved with Dr. Santora and Suboxone therapy, and it was a great experience for me. I know it's a very taboo for some people, and some people, in AA rooms, they'll discount your sobriety and they'll say, well, you're not really sober because you're on Suboxone and all this. And I just tell the newcomer and the guys that are in treatment centers that are considering that, I didn't get sober so some guy in a church basement could consider me sober. I got sober so I could hold a job for more than 3 months. So my parents didn't feel like they needed to lock everything away when I was home. That's why I got sober. So I'm not really interested in meeting somebody else's definition of sobriety. As long as I'm living the way God intended me to live, and being a beneficial member of society, I think that's what matters the most. And through this time, I mean, really what changed was my surrenderness, that I needed to relinquish people's places and things, specifically people, friends that I thought were going to be my quote unquote friends for life. They just didn't get it. And I mean, it's nothing against them. And I see them occasionally out and about, and we say hi and glance, but I'm not calling them. I mean, still to this day, I'm not associating myself with them, because it's recovery for me is it's an all-in thing. It's every part of my life. I mean, my entire social life, or other people that are also in sobriety and recovery. Largely, I mean, there's some coworkers that I mingle with here and there, I may golf with, but if I'm golfing today, I golf a lot. And if I golf with somebody that really starts pounding them down while they're on the course and getting a little carried away with the cart girl, I remember that, and I'll never golf with that person again. I just don't put myself in situations. I'm very guarded. I'm very vigilant to this day. I mean, so much so that I've, sworn off nicotine. I've got myself in trouble with using too much nicotine. Caffeine is another thing. I mean, I haven't had nicotine in 15 months. Caffeine I have in very, very limited dosages. Really will only drink unsweetened tea. I stay away from energy drinks and stuff, because it's all stuff that's not good for me, and it's can bring back familiar feelings. But through my time in sobriety, I like to consider January 25th, 2010 almost as like a second act of my life. I there's nothing I can complain about. When I was 11 months sober, I had to go to jail for 72 hours for that car accident. I got charged with a DUI. And it was just, it was such a great experience. I mean, I'm sure in that 72 hours, I was, couldn't wait for it to be over, and was probably pretty scared and all that. But, to live that consequence sober enough to really appreciate it. I mean, I had to use PTO hours for the job I was at to go to jail for 3 days. It was a great experience. And when I was really big Pursued by Grace moment, when I was sober for almost 2 years, I lost my license for 2 years, and I worked a job where I was an outside salesperson, and I needed to get to my appointments, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And I went to that guy, Brian, and I explained my situation. And he said, well, people are coming to live here. They don't have a job right away. So why don't you pay them a certain amount, and they'll drive your car and drive you to your appointments? And I mean, there was a time in my sobriety where I wasn't associating with people. I wasn't going to that many meetings. I was convincing myself, well, I'm not going to have my license, so I don't want to get too involved, so to speak. And this put me right back into it. I mean, I had to be with somebody in recovery every single day. And I got married last year. I had 7 groomsmen. 5 of them I met through that situation. So that's how close I became with those guys. And God put those people in my life, at that moment for that reason. It was a big Pursued by Grace moment for me. Through sobriety now, I've worked at 3 companies. I worked at one company for 7 years, another company for a little over 2, going almost 3, and now at the newest company. And each one's had its fair share of angst with it, and especially leaving the first company I was at. I mean, that was I started working there. I was 3 months sober, and that was tough. And leaving this last company, it was a family company that we happened to know a lot of people, because they had some people they knew in recovery. So that was tough, but God's had my back along the way. And as you've heard me mentioned, uh, I got married last year. I've had my first child back in April of this year. And if I catch myself, you know, looking down a road of self wallow and despair, and life is hard, I just think about all the blessings, because 2018 was a tough year in recovery. There was a lot of people in Berks County that passed away, and specifically in the circle that I associate myself with and happen to know a lot of people. We probably lost like 8 people, which was the most death that I experienced in recovery. And so, that's always what I try to keep in the back of my mind, that I'm, thank you God for blessing me with another day of sobriety. I mean, that's literally one of the things that I say in my out loud prayer every day. And the things that have, really helped me in sobriety has been that spiritual relationship. I mean, that is really, I mean, I don't even want to call it the cornerstone. I'd call it the foundation and maybe the first 2 floors. That's how important it is to me, and how much I attribute to my ongoing sobriety. But also having a routine. Routine's very, very big for me, because, when I was out there ripping and running, it was kind of, I went by the wind, so to speak. I never knew when I was waking up. I never knew when I was going to bed. I never knew when I was eating, and I never knew when I was showering. I mean, I picked some of it up from obviously being in treatment centers, but it's carried on to this day. I go to bed largely at the same time every day. I wake up at the same time every day. Um, I have certain things that are known that I do. I mean, people laugh at this, but like I shave 3 times a week, and I work out on Saturday mornings at a specific time, and I do all these specific things at specific times. And I kind of think it to myself as an insurance policy that, hey, if I stop shaving on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays, my wife's probably going to notice that. She's maybe going to raise an eyebrow, and hopefully, I mean, knock on wood and pray to God that this never happens, that she has to suspect something. But there's enough about me out there that it would be rather easy to convince me, um, or rather easy to confront me. Another important thing to my recovery is my network, and the people that I associate myself with. I've been very blessed to have an extremely close group of like 9 to 10 friends that we all kind of got sober around the same time, or we went through similar sobriety journeys with the treatment center we went to, or some of the aftercare that we attended. And I mean, these guys are my on earth guardian angels. We associate with each other almost exclusively. I mean, we're not too proud to call each other out, when we feel one of us is doing something that's maybe not beneficial to our recovery. And that's something, as I mentioned earlier in my talking, that it can happen. I mean, I've gotten carried away with nicotine in the past. I've gotten carried away with caffeine in the past. I can get carried away with gambling in the past. I mean, anything that can remotely release dopamine in my brain, I'm sure I can find a way to do it in excess. And that's, an unfortunate thing, but something that I'll live with my whole life. And I'm really fortunate to have, a wife and a family, and a support group that can, help me recognize that, and hopefully, help me reel it in. Um, I always have a tough time closing these things. I guess I just would like to say that um, it's just been such a blessed life that I've been able to sit here and share this story, and that I'm not, a a couple lines in the back of a newspaper, or, you know, some of my buddies that have not chose the path of sobriety, you know, calling from some state penitentiary, or, you know, they say there's three outcomes: there's jails, institutions, and death. And I'm really blessed to be sitting here in this situation. And I don't, you know, share all these things to sit here and brag. I share them to say that, you know, if you were listening to my story, you know, 11 years ago, I was, you know, going into public bathrooms to inject myself with poison. And that's what recovery has brought to me. You know, for those of you that experience stigma in recovery through either, you know, a social setting, I would recommend that if you have, you know, a social group that doesn't agree to what you have going on or what you're trying to achieve, that it's probably a good time to look at that social group, and hopefully find some people that are, you know, more supportive and understanding. And those of you that are in certain recovery circles that are on medically assisted treatment, I hope what I shared, you know, is somewhat helpful to some of the pushback. Personally, I don't share it unless I'm asked to share it. I don't readily raise my hand at 12-step get-togethers and, you know, advocate for medically assisted treatment, because they're welcome to have their opinion and I'm welcome to have mine. But I also think that it's, you know, really important that if one of the two find out of each other, that we don't take time to belittle one or the other. You know, I mean, the bottom line is, if you're not using drugs and alcohol, and you're not stealing, and you're not breaking the law, and you're not living dishonestly, what does it matter how you get there? You know, I mean, everybody takes a different road in life. But it's all about helping people along the way. And that's, you know, whenever I'm asked to speak somewhere, I try to always throw my hand up, or, you know, put my name on the list to give back what was so freely given to me. You know, the AA has a nice prayer that says, I'm responsible. When anyone, anywhere reaches out for help, I want the hand of AA to be there. And for that, I'm responsible. And I take that very seriously. So if I get a call from somebody at 9:30 at night that, you know, is in a bad spot, I'm always going to pick that call up. And if I get asked and given the honor to speak somewhere in front of a group of people, I'm always going to do that, because I just hope that if it wasn't the whole 45 minutes that I've been speaking, that at least 1 to 3 minutes of it has helped you put something into perspective, or, you know, it has helped in some way. So I'm looking here, I'm at 6:38. I've almost made it 45 minutes. There's 6 viewers on Facebook Live, so I'm certain I can start singing if people want me to start singing. I'm not sure what song I'll do, but, you know, I'll just let the Facebook community determine that. And if anybody has any specific questions,
Yes.
to do that.
Yeah, so there was a question, Dan. There's so many things I wanted to comment on what you were sharing, because they just really were so personal for me, in terms of I could just relate to a whole lot of what you said. But I want to get to a question that was here, and someone said, can you speak more about your MAT, the benefits, any disadvantages, and how did you deal with the stigma surrounding MAT?
Well, I felt it was all benefits. You know, to be quite honest with you, it was, I guess, somewhat of an insurance policy. I mean, to use that term, I mean, you know, I work in insurance, so I'm always, I guess, kind of preemptively thinking of it and things of that way. But if I had decided to have a moment of weakness and use drugs or alcohol in the specific MAT I was on, you know, my opiate receptors would have been blocked. And I actually think that there's a dosage within Suboxone that you get, like, you reject it, you get sick to some capacity, like similar to antabuse with alcohol. So there was that comfort in it. And I mean, if you know, I'm not going to be able to really articulately put this because I'm not a physician, so I would direct you to a medical professional. But in layman's terms, they explained to me about like your processing of cravings, has to do with these like cups in your brain. And the addict has these uneven cups, and Suboxone helps keeps those cups even. So that, I don't know that like maybe it was even a placebo. I don't know. I'm sure it wasn't a placebo, but I mean, it's not like I can really think back on a day that I used Suboxone and the day that I stopped using it, that there was this, massive difference in feeling. And in terms of how I dealt with the stigma, I mean, I largely kept it to myself. It had come up at a few times, and I've just like very passionately, like, for instance, I have a group of friends that are, largely based in the 12 steps. And sometimes that will come up. They'll make what I feel is like a backhanded comment about Suboxone. Oh, you can look at that person and tell they're on Suboxone. And I'll say, what the hell is that supposed to mean? Because I mean, as far as I'm on it right now.
Right.
For me, you never would have been able to tell. I'm a naturally high energy person. And I mean, if someone's on Suboxone, I think it's definitely better than the alternative. I mean, at least with Suboxone, you're hoping that they're getting it from a physician and they're under a physician's care that's, doing it in a guided way. I mean, I don't want to go out on a limb here and say something that someone's going to get me in the comments and be like, well, actually, it's less. But I don't know of anybody that's been under a physician's care on Suboxone that's, then died from it in any capacity. Certainly not Dr. Santora. I'm almost certain I would have heard about that. So and like I said before, I'm just a big believer that I don't really care if I don't meet somebody else's definition of sobriety. I mean, it's not something that's important to me. What's important to me is everything else, and it's the ability to provide for my family and have a relationship with my family. And that's what's important. So if somebody says, well, he doesn't really have 10 years, I mean, they're welcome to have that opinion. I don't have no interest in changing it, but it doesn't matter to me.
Right. Well, and you are a really great example of just your outlook on your quality of life has changed. And there is no doubt about that based on what you shared, based on who you were and what happened, your quality of life has changed. And so when we look at the definition of recovery, according to SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, there's a whole gamut that's included with that in terms of changing the quality of their life. And you, like you said, there were times that you had interfaced with jails, institutions, and had you continued that trail, all of us, we would be on that trail of destruction and imminent death. And those things are no longer in your pathway. And so I say congratulations. Since 2010, you've turned your life around. So I have a question in that because, like me, you had talked about there's more than one visit to a treatment, right? Which I think for those that are listening to know that the road to recovery sometimes is being met with relapses or return to use, right? What can you share with us that you think might have happened? What was that aha moment for you that said, I just really need to follow direction. I really need to stop this rationalization in my mind, thinking I know best and curtailing, well, I'm not going to do, use this drug, but I'll use that drug and don't tell. So what ultimately something had to happen for you to change your whole insight? And do you know, or did it just kind of?
No, I do know. It was when I was in the Reading detox, and I was sitting in there and had this girl walked in that I knew. Her name is London, and I had known her through Penn State Berks, and she was, coming in there as a nursing intern. She was doing like her clinical rotation, and obviously I was a patient, and something like 2 years earlier, we were probably at the same party together.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really like, kind of, I'm trying to think, trading places moment almost. I mean, not that she was ever in a treatment center, but that's kind of like what it felt like. I mean, here she is continuing with her life. We're the same age.
Mm.
She's entering into a big phase of her life. And, I'm sitting in a treatment center. So that was like a real humbling moment. And I had realized at that point, I knew what to do. It was just a matter of doing it. And
Mm-hmm.
I heard some good stories when I was in the Reading Detox, and I had started incorporating a daily prayer when I was in the Reading Detox, which was not something I had ever done before, and it's continued. It's continued on this day. I'm not saying that if you pray every day, you're gonna magically stay sober. I mean, there's a lot of other stuff that I do, but
Right.
it's a huge part of it because it's
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I always feel like someone's with me, watching me, and not in a negative way, but almost in a way of like, I bet I better be living my best life right now, because it
Yeah.
matters. And I've been given. I mean, if you hear it, I mean, I prefer to say pursued by grace, but I've been given, so many second chances that
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I have to imagine that God had this path for me for a specific reason.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
There's another question here, and thank you for that response. That was, I felt that. I just felt the sincerity of that pursued by grace. I hadn't heard that before, so I want to take that under my own vocabulary wing, is to say, I think we all, those of us that have endured this journey, and when we've met our bumps in the road, it was grace that picked us up and carried us forward. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here to tell our truths.
Mhm.
Um, and there's somebody else that asked a question that says, what encouragement can you give to families walking alongside somebody that may be struggling with an addiction today? So what can you share with families just in terms of that loved one who, may be embraced in an act of addiction? What can family members do or say um, that might allow them to continue to hang in there, if you will?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, from what I've gathered from my mom's recovery program is Al-Anon's centered around the three C's. You didn't cause it, you can't control it, and you can't cure it. And that's,
Mm-hmm.
three things you need to keep in mind. And I just think to be like supportive, but in the right way. I mean, if they need food, you give them food, but you don't give them money. I mean, if
Mm-hmm.
they say they need something, you get that specific item for them, and oh no, you can just give me the money and I'll get it, because they probably have other intentions for that money for the most part. And then I don't know, I've never been good at, like, I have a buddy that, I mean, he has relapsed so many times, and I've been there for him every time in some capacity, and pick him up, and he gets this sobriety, and then it happens all over again. And I've had people in my own group that says, at some point you have to cut ties with him and not be that. And I somewhat have this time.
Mm-hmm.
He's in his state penitentiary right now, and I used to like put money on his books all the time, and he'd call me and send him magazines and stuff like that. But I told him, I mean, this last time, I mean, I probably didn't answer his call for 9 months.
Okay.
And when I finally connected with him, I was somewhat honest with him, and I said, I'm sorry for the situation that you're in, but what realistically do you expect me to continue to do here? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I really need you to get some honest to godness, goodness sober time, and then and he's respected that. I mean, but even then, I mean, there's been instances where I've sent him some money, so I may not be the best person. And I worry about that with my own daughter. I mean, they say that addiction, is a genetic thing. There's certainly addiction on my dad and my mom's side of the family, and
Mm-hmm.
not them specifically, but brother, uncles of theirs, and parents of theirs. And I worry about that with my daughter. I mean, is she gonna? I hope not, but if she's gonna struggle with it, and what I'm going to do at that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
And what do you say to the families that have that loved one that is, in early recovery? Because sometimes, early recovery can be a walking on eggshells for the family, but also even with the individual, because they may not have bought into it right away, and they may be like half stepping, if you will, like maybe they'll go to a meeting sometimes, maybe they won't. But is there anything that family members can do in terms of trying to rebuild that trust? I guess that's my question.
I think the best way is to set expectations and to set boundaries. And if the two aren't met, I mean, that's really what, where you have the rules of engagement, so to speak.
Yeah.
I mean, it's specifically the boundaries things. I mean, my mom never counted my meetings, but, it was certainly known that if I was going to live with her, that I was expected to work a recovery program. So if she, found me watching, Netflix too much, she'd certainly call me out and confront me on it. And that's happened a few times, but I mean, you can't have like a moving target, I mean, cause that becomes very like, it's like, well, hold on a second, I'm meeting everything. Now I have to meet this, and it can,
right.
I would say they always say like the year recovery is like this benchmark, and it's because if you do anything for a year, it becomes second nature. That's why I think the year is used as that like first real big pillar of recovery. But that's what I would recommend, is having that conversation as early as possible, especially if you're living with that loved one, and then sticking by that.
Yeah. And you also talked about your regimen, because I agree with you that first year is a matter of, we did so well at using, that was kind of, we used to live and live to use, right? And now that we need to replace the using with something proactive and positive, can you just speak a little bit to I heard you talk about prayer and meditation, but is there additional things throughout your day that you try to make as part of your daily regimen for your recovery?
Yeah. Well, there's prayer. I mean, that's something that I do every morning. I also have tried to incorporate it more throughout the day, at least the morning and the evening. I make my bed every day, and a lot of people think that that's like a real, kind of a corny thing to do, but it's the truth. I mean, it's like there's a speech that I watched really early in recovery that was centered around making your bed, and it makes a difference in my day. And the always back of my head is, no matter how bad my day is, I'm always going to have a freshly made bed. I would say those are the two, the biggest things. I mean, I always try to get some sort of exercise, in my day, even if it's something as small as walking. It's just like an accomplishable task that releases good endorphins in my head. And if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. It's especially, as what happens in recovery is people, start to rebuild a life, and then all of that becomes more important than recovery. And it's easy to do. I mean, especially, we have a 5-month-old, and there's all sorts of things that I'd rather be doing than sitting in my basement, which I've been at all day because I work down here, and sitting in front of this computer. As much as I like you, Yvonne, and doing this, but I mean, but it's a commitment that I made, and I take commitments very seriously. So those are, I would say, those are some of the biggest things that I do and try to do on an ongoing basis.
That's awesome. Thank you. And then the last question we have for you for the evening, Dan, is Audrey asked, Dan, are you yourself involved in Al-Anon, and how is your relationship with your parents, particularly your mom, like today?
Yeah, I'm not involved with Al-Anon. I've been to an Al-Anon meeting with her, but I don't work an ongoing Al-Anon program. And the relationship with both my parents is better than it's ever been. I mean, my mom and my dad have both, been overly supportive with me in recovery and have given me multiple chances. Um, but that it's stuff that's always requiring work. I mean, I not to back into this, but I mean, like, just because you get sober doesn't mean you can, stop making wreckage. I mean, we have this. I mean, for me, I have a whole litany of character defects, and rage and anger are two things that I can really, latch on to and run away with. And I've, had my fair share of relationships that I've tarnished in recovery and that I've had to work on rebuilding. And in some cases I have, in some cases it's an ongoing process. I mean, fortunately, my parents aren't one of them. And, I'll continue to try to work on the ones that I haven't. But I think part of it is, an acknowledgement to know that that's an issue that I have, and is part of recovery in me. Because, the old Dan, it just would have been like, well, that person, that's that, but, I'm able to step back and say, no, I mean, it's because I did this and this, and now I got to try to figure out a way to not necessarily undo that, but I think you catch what I mean.
Yeah, it's a work in progress. I think recovery is a work in progress. There's no plateau to get to. This journey, that's why they call it a journey. It's a process. It's not an event. And as part of that journey, we learn to evolve, and as we learn more about ourselves, we continue to work on ourselves so that we aren't hurting ourselves or anyone else. And so, that work in progress is part of life's journey.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we have about 3 minutes left, Dan, and I just so want to thank you. I know, you could have been doing 100 different things today, but just really joining us tonight and sharing a little bit about who you are and what happened in your journey, what life is like for you today, and just having a conversation about MAT, hopefully for those that have had one perception about MAT, that it's changed a little bit for the better, to say that people get well. And even the big book in AA talks about that when you need to allow medication to help you as part of your journey, there's nothing wrong with that. Dr. Bob talked about that even in the big book. So we need to be diligent and recognize that as people look and journey of their recovery, it's a unique journey and a special journey unto ourselves. And whatever can help us with our well-briety, we need to not close the door on that. And just want to thank folks for continuing to tune in and hang in with us during National Recovery Month. I want to encourage those of you that have not had an opportunity to visit the Berks Rise website to please do so. There we have future events. Again, we're going to have another speaker on next Tuesday night, and he's going to talk a little bit about his journey. And so that'll be next Tuesday night at 6 o'clock, and we hope that you'll tune in for us. Again, if you have a video that you'd like to share with us, or a picture along with a paragraph that tells us about why what recovery means to you, please send it to us on our website, berksrise.org, and we will send you a t-shirt as a ambassador for recovery. And our Recovery Out Loud speaker series will continue on for the month of September. So my name is Yvonne. I'm a person in long-term recovery, as many of you know. We thank you for always supporting us and always checking us out. And I look forward to seeing you on next Tuesday. Come with your open mind and your questions, and we will continue to rally around the recovery notion that people do live in long-term recovery, and recovery does work. So thank you for tuning in. Good night.